The glow of 9,000 fractured light points hung in the air above Pelith's workstation, each one a data orb she had catalogued, cross-referenced, and dismissed over the course of a career so long it had outlived 3 different filing systems. She knew them all. The way Vethian gas giants pulsed amber in their orbital summaries. The way Calethri border reports always arrived with too much military jargon and not enough useful data. The way a routine xenobiology scan looked when it meant nothing, and she had seen them mean nothing 23 times already today. Report 24 did not mean nothing. It opened the way they all did. Spectral signature, atmospheric composition, orbital position. Third planet of a mid-sequence yellow star. Blue-green, 21% oxygen. Liquid water oceans. 1 large moon. Intelligent life confirmed. Technological classification. Level 6. Primitive. Pre-interstellar. Unremarkable in every column that mattered. She almost closed it, but the cross-reference field was wrong. Pelith had been an archivist for 45 years. She had run coordinate matches on tens of thousands of worlds. When a planet appeared for the first time in the archive, the cross-reference returned 0 results. Always, that was how new entries worked. The system simply confirmed that no prior records existed, and you moved on. This planet returned 9 prior entries, dates cascading backward through the archive like something falling down a stairwell. 8,000 years ago, 15,000, 22,000, 34,000, 41, 47, 53, 58. And then the 9th, 60,000 years ago, the oldest file in the Galactic Archive. Encrypted. Mordathiera. Clearance level 12. Her clearance was level 9. Nobody had level 12. Nobody alive, anyway. The Mordathi had been gone for 60 millennia, transcended, dissolved, whatever word the theologians preferred that decade. Their files were artifacts. Their encryption was decoration on a locked door that everyone assumed led to an empty room. The alarm did not sound the way Pelith expected. She had triggered security flags before. Misfiles, corrupted headers, the occasional quarantined pathogen report that hadn't been properly sealed. Those produced a soft chime, a gentle correction. This was not a chime. Every data orb within 30 meters of her workstation turned red. A low resonance filled the crystalline walls of the xenobiology wing, and the floor beneath her feet, which had been cool and smooth and utterly stable for as long as she could remember, began to vibrate. Her skin, normally a pale translucent blue, had gone so dark it was nearly indigo. She could see it on her own hands, and she couldn't stop it. On the file header, one word pulsed in Mordathi script older than most civilizations in the galaxy. Torvin. And beneath it, in characters that the translation matrix could barely process, a single command: let none approach. The archive fell silent. Pelith did not move. Somewhere far below the main floor, a door she had never known existed began to open. If you've ever stumbled across something you weren't meant to find, something that made the air feel different, then you already know why this story demands your attention. Subscribe, because what that file contained rewrote everything. The data orb containing Report 24 had still been a warm amber when she'd first picked it up. 6 hours before the xenobiology wing went dark and 2 armed archival sentinels escorted her to a level of the building she didn't know existed. Pelith's morning had started the way all her mornings started. She arrived at her workstation in the Galactic Archives 40 minutes before her shift, because 45 years of habit had made punctuality feel like breathing. The xenobiology wing occupied the eastern arm of the archive, a cathedral of crystalline shelving that rose 90 levels above the main floor, each tier holding thousands of data orbs that floated in soft magnetic suspension. The dominant sound was a hum, low and constant, the resonance of the crystal itself responding to the ambient data traffic. It smelled faintly of ozone and old polymer, the polymer from the binding gel that held the oldest physical records together, the ones too fragile to digitize. Pelith had always liked that smell. It reminded her that knowledge had weight. She processed reports the way she always did, one at a time. Spectral data, atmospheric models, biological surveys, threat assessments. Each report got between 40 seconds and 3 minutes of her attention, depending on complexity. Most were planetary surveys forwarded from deep-range observation posts, automated systems that scanned star systems, flagged anything with atmospheric irregularities or biosignatures, and sent the results to the archive for permanent filing. 23 of them that morning were unremarkable. Gas giants, barren rocks, a frozen moon with microbial life that would get a footnote in the Netheri Biological Index and nothing else. Report 24 arrived in the same batch, the same format, the same automated header. She should not have noticed anything wrong. The cross-reference was a background process, a subroutine that ran automatically while she reviewed the atmospheric data. It wasn't even displayed prominently. It sat in the lower left corner of the data projection, a small numerical field that almost always read 0. But Peleth had been doing this for 45 years. She saw the 9 the way a musician hears a wrong note in the middle of an orchestra. Not because she was looking for it, but because her entire body was tuned to the rhythm of what was normal, and this was not normal. The number sat there, small and patient, and everything around it was suddenly wrong. She ran the cross-reference again manually. 9. She narrowed the search parameters. 9. She checked for data corruption, duplicate entries, phantom echoes from the last system migration. 9 results. 9 separate files, logged by 9 different civilizations across 9 different millennia, all pointing to the same coordinates. The same small blue-green world orbiting the same yellow star. And the 9th file, the oldest, the deepest, the one buried so far in the archive's foundation that it predated the archive itself, was Mordathi. Level 12. Sealed with encryption so dense that the file header alone consumed more processing power than the other 8 files combined. One word on the header. A name she had never seen before, in a language that no living species spoke fluently. Torvin. Her data stylus stopped moving. Her skin had already begun to darken. A stress response she'd never been able to control, the Cytherian equivalent of a flushed face, and she watched the blue of her forearms deepen to something closer to midnight. The cross-reference field still read 9. The Mordathi encryption still pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light, as though the file itself had a heartbeat. She flagged it. Within 11 minutes, 2 archival sentinels arrived. Tall, uniformed, carrying sidearms she had only ever seen in security briefings. They said nothing. They simply stood on either side of her workstation and waited. 90 seconds later, a priority summons appeared on her display. Not from her department head. Not from the wing supervisor. From Grand Librarian Vas Tesserin. Peleth had worked in the Galactic Archives for 45 years, and she had never once been summoned by the Grand Librarian. She had seen him twice, both times at distance during formal archive ceremonies. He was old, older than the current council. A crystalline being whose body refracted light in ways that shifted with his emotional state. His voice a resonance that other species felt in their bones before their ears registered it. He ran the archive the way gravity ran a star system, silently, invisibly, and with a force that no one questioned. And now he wanted to see her. The sentinels walked her down. Past the main floors, past the restricted wings, past sections she had never been granted access to. The air changed as they descended, warmer, drier, and carrying a faint metallic taste that coated the back of her throat. The crystal walls here were darker, older, veined with mineral deposits that hadn't been cleaned in centuries because no one came down here. The lighting was amber instead of white, and the hum of the archive above had faded to something more like a pulse. They stopped at a sealed door. Mordathiera construction. The sentinels entered a clearance code, and the door opened with a sound like a long-held breath being released. The chamber beyond was small and circular. The walls were covered in artifacts. Stone tablets, metal plates, crystalline shards, each one engraved with symbols that predated the Galactic Council by tens of thousands of years. Warning symbols. Peleth recognized some of them from her training, the universal markers for biological hazard, existential threat, quarantine. But these were not the clean, standardized versions used by modern civilizations. These were old, hand-carved, made by beings who were afraid. Grand Librarian Vas Tesserin stood at the center of the chamber, and his body was dim. Not the gentle, warm dimness of contemplation that she had seen in recordings of his public addresses. This was the dimness of a crystalline being under severe stress. His light pulled inward, concentrated, as though he were trying to hold himself together. The resonance of his voice, when he spoke, traveled through the floor and up through the bones of her feet before she heard the words. Archivist Noon. His form flickered. You have found what the Mordathi spent 12,000 years trying to contain. He gestured toward a projection that floated above the center of the room, the Mordathi file, fully decrypted. She could see now what her level 9 clearance had hidden from her. The file was not a report. It was a warning, a final entry transmitted 60,000 years ago by a civilization that commanded a watch fleet of 50,000 ships, the largest standing military force in recorded galactic history, and it had not been enough. The decrypted text filled the air between them, and Peleth read the words that had been locked away since before her species had developed language. The children of Torvin stir. We cannot hold. All vessels withdraw. Let the galaxy prepare. Vas Tesseran's body dimmed further. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a vibration. I have called an emergency session of the Inner Council. He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw something in a crystalline being that she had only ever seen in organic species. Something in the way his light contracted and held still. It looked like fear. Archivist Noon, do you understand what Level 6 means? She did. Level 6 was primitive, pre-interstellar, a species still bound to its own world, still centuries from faster-than-light capability. Every species in the galaxy had been Level 6 once. It meant they were not a threat. It meant they could be studied, observed, left alone. Level 6, Vas said, and the resonance in his voice made the warning symbols on the walls glow faintly, is what the Mordathi classified them as 12,000 years into their watch. Level 6 is what they were when the Mordathi, with 50,000 warships and technology we still cannot replicate, decided the only rational option was to leave this plane of existence entirely. He let the silence hold. The Mordathi did not lose a war, Archivist. They did not fall to plague or entropy or internal collapse. They looked at that small blue world, and they ran. They ran so far and so fast that they shed their physical forms to do it. He turned back to the projection. And the children of Torvin are still there, still on that same world, still classified Level 6. The chamber was quiet. The warning symbols pulsed. Still primitive, Peleth said. The words came out thin. Still primitive, Vas confirmed. For now. Vas called the emergency session within the hour. Peleth was not invited. She was ordered to attend. The distinction mattered. An invitation meant your expertise was valued. An order meant you were the only person alive who had touched the file with bare hands, and they needed you in the room in case the data required live verification. She was not a counselor. She was not a diplomat. She was an archivist who had opened the wrong report on an ordinary morning, and now she sat in a chamber she had only ever seen in historical briefings, trying to keep her skin from turning black. The council inner circle chamber was nothing like the archive, where the xenobiology wing was open and vertical, light and crystal and space. This room was tight, low-ceilinged, and built like a fist. A circular table dominated the center, carved from a single piece of dark stone that predated the council itself. 14 seats surrounded it, each shaped to accommodate a different founding species. The light here came from beneath the floor, a warm, amber upwelling that made every face look older than it was. The air tasted different too, dry, filtered through systems that stripped chemical signatures, emotional pheromones, anything that might give one species an advantage over another in negotiation. Tasted like nothing. That was the point. Peleth sat in an observer's alcove along the curved wall, her data stylus ready, her hands trembling in a way she hoped no one could see. They arrived one at a time. Marshal Gorvin entered first. Peleth had never seen a Calethri in person, and the reality of one standing 4 meters away made her grip her stylus hard enough to hear the casing creak. He was enormous, 8 feet of layered armored plates that shifted and clicked when he moved, like tectonic activity given a skeleton. For arms, the upper pair rested on the table edge. The lower pair hung at his sides, each hand large enough to wrap around her entire torso. His face, if it could be called that, was a ridge of bone and sensor tissue that tracked movement the way a weapon tracks a target. He sat, and the stone chair groaned beneath him. Sage Ilithsan arrived second, and the contrast was so sharp it almost felt staged. The Netheri elder did not walk. She floated, a robed figure suspended half a meter above the floor, her body hidden beneath layers of fabric that moved like water even in still air. She did not speak the way other species spoke. Her communication came through harmonic vibrations that resonated directly in the listener's chest, bypassing ears entirely. Pelith felt Ilith's presence before she saw her. A low, steady thrum that settled somewhere behind her sternum, like a second heartbeat that wasn't hers. Ilith took her place at the table without a sound. The harmonics dimmed to a murmur. Voss stood at the head of the table, the Mordathi file projected above the stone surface. His body was still dim. He had not brightened since the sealed chamber. When the last counselors took their seats, representatives from 11 founding species, most of whom Pelith recognized only from archival portraits, he began. He did not ease into it. He showed them the file, the 9 cross-references, the escalating dates, the Mordathi encryption, and then the decoded warning, word by word, hanging in the air above the table in script that most of them had only seen in museums. The children of Torvin stir. We cannot hold. All vessels withdraw. Let the galaxy prepare. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Pelith watched it hit. Gorvin's armored plates locked. A full-body tension response that made him look less like a living being and more like a wall. Ilith's harmonics shifted to a frequency so low that Pelith felt it in her teeth. 2 counselors she didn't know exchanged a glance that carried the weight of something old and shared and deeply unpleasant. Torvin. The word moved through the chamber the way a crack moves through glass. Silently, inevitably, and in every direction at once. Pelith watched counselors who had governed star systems for centuries lean back in their seats as though the name itself carried mass. The Mordathi maintained a watch fleet of 50,000 ships, Voss said. His resonance was carefully controlled now, informational, measured. For 12,000 years, that fleet held position around the 3rd planet. Their technology exceeded anything we currently possess. Their numbers exceeded any standing military force in the modern galaxy. He paused. The projection shifted to show fleet disposition records, thousands of ship markers arranged in concentric shells around a small blue dot. It was not enough. Their final entry states they could not hold. And then they left. Left, Gorvin repeated. The word came out like gravel being crushed. You mean they were destroyed? No. The voice came from the observer alcoves on the far side of the chamber. Pelith turned. A Netheri she hadn't noticed, smaller than Ilith, wearing the plain wrappings of an academic rather than an elder, leaned forward into the light. Professor Kelith. Pelith recognized the name from a series of archaeological papers on pre-council civilizations that she had filed 9 years ago. The Mordathi were not destroyed, Marshal. There is no debris field, no battle record, no residual weapon signatures in the region. They evolved. They shed their physical forms and transitioned to a non-corporeal state of existence. They ascended, Ilith said. Her harmonics carried the word with a reverence that made Pelith's chest ache. They fled, Kelith corrected, and the reverence shattered. Ascension implies choice. The Mordathi records indicate urgency, not enlightenment. They developed the capability to leave the physical plane, and they used it the way a drowning species uses a lifeboat. They did not transcend because they wanted to. They transcended because it was the only exit that the children of Torvin could not follow them through. The silence that followed was the thickest Pelith had ever felt. Gorvin broke it. His upper arms came down flat on the table, and the stone cracked beneath his palms, a hairline fracture that ran 6 inches before stopping. Then we strike now, while they are still level 6, while they are still bound to their world. We burn the planet and end this before. Every species that made contact with Torvin has vanished. Ilith's harmonics hit a register that stopped Gorvin mid-sentence. Not loud, not aggressive, just final the way a door closing is final. 9 civilizations across 9 ages. The Mordathi were the greatest of them, and they chose oblivion over confrontation. What do you propose to bring, Marshal, that 50,000 Mordathi warships could not? Gorvin said nothing. His plates shifted, clicking in a pattern Peleth couldn't read. Peleth noted the moment. The way Ilitha's warning hung in the air, the way Gorvin's silence swallowed it without acknowledgement. Not agreement, not acceptance. Just the quiet refusal of a warrior to accept that fighting was not an option. Voss projected the behavioral analysis next. Peleth had seen fragments of it in the original file, but the full dataset was something else entirely. The humans, the children of Torvin, climbed mountains that could kill them for recreation. They had developed weapons capable of rendering their own world uninhabitable before they had developed the ability to leave it. They ran into structures that were actively burning to retrieve other humans trapped inside. Their stress responses included laughter. Their bonding mechanisms included ritualized combat. Their biological threat assessment was moderate, fragile skeletal structure, limited sensory range, slow reproduction, but their adaptive capacity was rated off the existing scale. The Mordathi had flagged it with a symbol Peleth had never seen. Voss translated it as without ceiling. War simulation, Voss said, and a new projection filled the air. Conducted by our own Strategic Analysis Division, using current Kelethri military capabilities against a hypothetical human civilization at their present technological level. If the Kelethri launch a full assault on Torvin, he paused. The projection showed numbers, and the numbers were bad. Humans reverse engineer captured Kelethri technology within 8 years. They achieve faster-than-light capability within 12. They arrive at the Kelethri homeworld within 25. Gorvin's plates went still, completely still. Peleth had never seen a Kelethri stop moving. 25 years, Voss repeated. From first contact to full reciprocal capability. The Strategic Analysis Division has never seen an adaptation curve that steep in any known species. The Mordathi were right to be afraid. The session lasted another 2 hours. Peleth recorded everything. Oracle Sethena, a Cytherian religious leader whose skin shifted through colors Peleth had never seen on another member of her species, patterns that seemed less like stress responses and more like something being channeled, stood and read from a prophecy so old that the language itself had to be translated through 3 intermediate dialects before it reached modern Cytherian. When the children of Torvin wake, Sethena intoned, and her skin blazed white. The old galaxy dies and something new is born. Nobody spoke for a long time after that. The decisions came fast once the silence broke. Not consensus, there was no consensus to be had, but action driven by the shared understanding that inaction was its own kind of death. And then the relay began and the galaxy started to move. This is the part of the story where everything changes, not in the telling, but in you. If you want to be here for what comes next, subscribe. The old galaxy is already dying. Captain Ymarazal was the first to move. Peleth learned this not from the council chamber but from an intercepted fleet communication that crossed her archival terminal 6 hours after the session ended. The system was routing everything related to Torvin through her station now, as though touching the file had made her its permanent custodian. Ymera was a merchant captain, commanding a trade fleet of 14 vessels on a standard route between the Kelethri border markets and the Netheri cultural exchange stations. Her species, Peleth couldn't identify it from the communication logs, some outer rim trader species she'd never catalogued, had a voice like dry paper being folded. In the audio log, Peleth heard her issue the order to her navigation officer with the calm efficiency of someone who had already done the math and did not like the answer. New course. 6 additional weeks of travel. Every route that passed within 200 light-years of the yellow star and its blue-green world was to be abandoned immediately. 6 weeks. Added to every journey. Permanently. The military response came next. General Preth Vakin, Kelethri like Gorvin, but where Gorvin was a fist, Vakin was evidently a chess player, issued a fleet-wide repositioning order that Peleth watched scroll across her terminal in real time. 8,000 Kelethri warships. Not toward human space. Away from it. The largest military withdrawal in Kelethri history. Executed without a single shot fired. Driven entirely by a 60,000-year-old file and a war simulation that ended in 25 years. The economic data arrived by morning. 300 star systems reported market instability within the first cycle after the council session's classified summary reached sector governors. Trade indices that had been stable for decades dropped 9% in hours. Shipping contracts were being renegotiated. Insurance rates for deep space routes tripled overnight. The galaxy was rearranging itself around a single set of coordinates, and most of the beings doing the rearranging didn't even know why. They just knew that the council had issued a priority advisory, and that the word Torvin was attached to it, and that was enough. The name carried its own gravity now. Peleth heard it spoken in the corridors of the archive, whispered by colleagues who had never handled a classified file in their lives, passed along in the half-accurate, fully terrified way that rumors travel. Torvin, the forbidden world, the testing ground, the place the Mordathi ran from. And then, 3 days after the council session, while Peleth was processing the 47th Torvin-related communication to cross her terminal that morning, the automated monitoring station at the edge of Sector 7G flagged something new. A signal. Broadcast in the open. No encryption. No military frequency. No weapons signature. Just a voice warm, unhurried, and completely unaware of the panic it was about to cause. Transmitted from the surface of a small blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. Hello to anyone listening. This is Earth. We'd love to meet you someday. Peleth stared at the waveform on her display. The signal was genuine, unencrypted, friendly. It had been broadcasting on repeat for what the monitoring station estimated was the better part of 2 decades, cycling through mathematical primes and linguistic root structures designed to be decipherable by any intelligence capable of receiving them. It was, by every technical measure, an invitation. The most dangerous beings in the galaxy were cheerfully asking to be friends. Peleth's skin went so dark it was nearly black. Her hands were shaking again. But this time, something else was happening too. Something she couldn't name. Something that sat in the space between terror and wonder and refused to resolve into either. She listened to the signal loop again. The voice was calm, almost gentle. It said hello the way someone opens a door for a stranger. Somewhere across 300 star systems, markets were crashing, fleets were retreating, and ancient prophecies were being dusted off for the first time in millennia. And the cause of all of it. Every redrawn trade route, every repositioned warship, every whispered repetition of a name that made counselors flinch, was a species that didn't know anyone was listening. A species that had said hello and meant it. The collision report arrived on Peleth's terminal 9 days after the council session, tagged with the same priority header that now accompanied everything connected to the coordinates of the yellow star. A Netheri research vessel, the Seeker of Dawn, operating under Commander Yvethran, had been conducting a deep space survey along the outer boundary of Sector 7G standard mission. Mineral mapping, the kind of slow, methodical work that generated the sort of reports Peleth used to file without reading. 17 crew, light armament, no military escort because the region had been classified as empty for the past 300 years. It was no longer empty. The object that struck the Seeker of Dawn was small, less than 2 meters across. Built from metals the Netheri sensors couldn't immediately identify, covered in markings that the ship's translation matrix flagged as linguistic but could not decode. It was moving fast. Not weapons fast. Exploration fast. The trajectory was outbound from the yellow star, aimed at nothing in particular, broadcasting a simple repeating signal on a frequency so basic that the Seeker's communication officer almost dismissed it as background noise. The signal was a question. Are you in need of assistance? Probe. Built by the children of Torvin. Fired into the dark with a message that assumed whoever found it might need help. The collision was not catastrophic, but it was bad enough. The probe struck the Seeker's port stabilizer array at an angle that sheared through the outer hull and sent a cascade of debris through the lower crew compartments. 23 injuries. 11 critical. The ship's medical bay was designed for 8 patients. Life support in the damaged sections failed within 2 hours. Peleth read the reports as they came in, one after another, each one stamped with a timecode and a crew member's name. Vital signs. Injury classifications. The flat, clinical language of a ship's medical system doing its best with insufficient resources. She read the name Drethvani, a young Netheri navigation specialist, 26 years into her first deep space posting, 14 times across 11 reports before the 15th report changed the vital signs column from numbers to a single word: deceased. Pelitha's stylus stopped. Her skin was dark again. It had barely lightened in 9 days, but something in her chest did something worse than tighten. It went still. She had never met Drethvani. She had never spoken to her, never seen her face outside of a personnel file thumbnail. But she had been reading her name for hours, tracking her oxygen saturation and blood pressure and the slow, failing rhythm of a body that could not hold on long enough, and now the name was just a name attached to a timestamp, and the timestamp was final. Commander Yveth Rand's voice appeared in the next communication log. Pelith listened. He was calm, the particular calm of someone who had already made a decision that would end his career and had accepted it. His orders from the council were explicit. Avoid all contact with anything originating from the Torvan coordinates. Do not respond to signals. Do not approach. Do not engage. He had 22 injured crew, a dead navigation specialist, a failing life support system, and the probe that had struck his ship was still broadcasting, still asking if anyone needed help, still cycling through that earnest, impossible little question as though the answer mattered. Rand responded. The communication was short. 3 sentences. He identified his vessel, stated his casualties, and requested medical assistance. He transmitted his coordinates in the same mathematical prime structure that the human broadcast had used, a choice that Pelith recognized as deliberate, a way of saying I am speaking your language because I need you to hear me. The response came faster than anyone expected. 36 hours. That was the estimate from the source of the return signal, a vessel that identified itself as Earth Vessel Horizon, registry number EV-7741, under the command of Captain Lena Torres. 36 hours to cross a distance that should have taken a Netheri ship 4 days. The humans were faster than the simulations had predicted. Pelith felt the information settle into her body the way the Mordathi warning had settled, not as data but as weight. The council was notified within minutes. Pelith watched the communication chain cascade through her terminal VOS to the inner council to Sector Command to the Kelethri military liaison. Marshal Gorvin's response was immediate and, for the first time since the council session, fractured. He wanted to intercept. General Vakin refused. The warships had been repositioned, 8,000 vessels moved to defensive positions far from human space, and Vakin would not reverse the order on the basis of a single collision. Gorvin argued. Vakin held. And then, in a communication log that Pelith had to read 3 times to be certain she was not misunderstanding the Kelethri military dialect, for Kelethri ship commanders broke formation. For captains, acting without orders, moving toward the Seeker of Dawn's coordinates with weapons charged. Vakin recalled them within the hour. 2 complied. 2 did not. They were intercepted by Vakin's own escort fleet and forcibly escorted back to formation. The incident was logged, classified, and buried in a file that arrived on Pelith's terminal because everything arrived on Pelith's terminal now. The fracture was small, for ships out of 8,000. But Pelith stared at the number and understood what it meant. The Kelethri were not a single wall. They were a wall with cracks, and the cracks were shaped like fear. She turned back to the Seeker of Dawn's feed. 36 hours passed. Pelith did not leave her workstation. She ate at her console, a ration bar that tasted like chalk and obligation, and she watched the Netheri vessel's telemetry data and the slow, terrible arithmetic of a medical bay running out of supplies. 2 more crew members entered critical status. The ship's engineer rerouted power from the weapons array to life support, buying hours, not days. And then the Horizon arrived. Pelith saw it first on the long-range sensor feed that the Seeker of Dawn was transmitting back to the archive, a ship slightly smaller than the Netheri vessel, built from alloys the sensors still couldn't fully classify, moving with a confidence that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with intent. It decelerated smoothly, matched the Seeker's drift, and transmitted a docking request in flawless Netheri trade language. The humans had learned Netheri trade language from the probe's response. In 36 hours, while traveling, Commander Rand granted docking. Pelith watched the 2 ships come together on her display, the wounded Netheri vessel and the smaller human ship, connecting through an emergency airlock adapter that the humans had apparently built during transit because their docking systems weren't compatible. Built it, in transit, from raw materials, because the adapter they needed didn't exist, so they made one. Pelitha's data stylus had stopped moving entirely. She wasn't recording anymore. She was just watching. The medical teams came through the airlock first. Pelith saw them on the Seeker's internal cameras, for humans in light biosuits, carrying equipment that the Netheri medical officer would later describe as 30 years ahead of anything I've seen. They moved fast, not panicked fast, trained fast, the kind of speed that comes from doing something you've done 100 times before and knowing exactly where your hands go. They saved 11 of the 12 critical patients in the first 4 hours. The 12th, a Netheri engineer with internal hemorrhaging that had progressed too far, was stabilized and placed in a stasis field the humans had brought with them. A stasis field. Portable. In a medic's bag. The Netheri did not have portable stasis technology. The Kalethri did not have portable stasis technology. The humans brought it in a bag. And then, while the medical teams worked, the engineering teams came through. Pelith watched them on the cameras. 3 humans with tools she couldn't identify, moving through the Seeker's damaged sections with the focused curiosity of people who had never seen Netheri engineering before and were figuring it out in real time. They asked questions. They touched things carefully. They conferred with each other in short, rapid exchanges that the translation matrix struggled to keep up with. And then they started fixing things. Not with Netheri parts, they didn't have any. With whatever they had on hand, adapted, reconfigured, forced into compatibility through what Pelith could only describe as aggressive creativity. The port stabilizer was functional again within 6 hours. And then, on a camera feed from the Seeker's makeshift common area, the one space on the ship where injured crew had been moved to make room in the medical bay, Pelith saw her. Captain Lena Torres. 38 years old, according to the file the Horizon had transmitted as part of the docking protocol. Brown hair pulled back. A face that carried the particular kind of tiredness that comes not from exhaustion but from sustained attention. The look of someone who had been making decisions for 36 straight hours and was still making them. She moved through the common area the way water moves through a channel, around obstacles, toward the places where she was needed, without hurry and without pause. She was carrying a container. Something from the Horizon's galley. Pelith watched her open it and offer its contents to the injured Netheri crew members with a gesture so simple and so ancient that it transcended species. The open hand, the offered food, the slight incline of the head that said "This is for you." Commander Ran approached her. Pelith could see him on the feed. Tall for a Netheri. His robe stained with coolant from the damaged sections he'd been working in alongside his crew. He moved the way someone moves when they are about to ask a question they have been carrying for a long time. "Captain Torres," he said. The translation matrix rendered his harmonics into flat text on Pelitha's screen, but she could imagine the vibration. "The ancient records, the ones that have governed our understanding of your world for 60,000 years, they use a name for your planet. For your people." He paused. Torvin. And now, with that name hanging in the recycled air of a damaged ship, the same name that had turned Pelitha's skin black, emptied council chambers, crashed 300 markets, and moved 8,000 warships. Captain Lena Torres looked at Commander Yvette Ran. She looked at him the way Pelith had seen humans look at things on the behavioral analysis feeds. Not with the calculating assessment of a species that understood its own reputation. Not with the gravity that 60,000 years of terror might warrant. She looked at him with her head tilted slightly to one side and her eyebrows raised and the corners of her mouth doing something that Pelith had learned, over 9 days of studying human facial architecture, was the precursor to a laugh. Torres laughed. "Torvin." She said the word the way someone says a nickname they've just heard for the first time. "Is that what you've been calling us? That's kinda cool, actually." She held out the container. "Want an empanada?" The name that had broken the galaxy open sat in the air between them, and it meant nothing. It meant nothing because the woman saying it did not know what it meant, and did not care, and was more interested in whether the alien in front of her was hungry. Pelith sat at her workstation in the Galactic Archives, 9 days and an entire species worth of terror away from this moment, and she watched a human offer food to a man whose civilization had spent 60 millennia afraid of her. The container was still open. The empanada was still warm. Peleth could see the steam on the camera feed, a faint curl rising from the folded dough. Rand stared at it. His harmonics, even flattened to text, carried something the translation matrix labeled as unable to classify. Torres waited. She did not withdraw the offer. She did not explain herself. She just stood there with her hand out and her head tilted and the warmth of something homemade rising between them. Rand took the empanada. He held it the way Peleth had held the data orb that started everything, carefully, uncertainly, as though the small thing in his hands contained more than he was equipped to understand. He looked at Torres. She smiled. Not the smile of a conqueror. Not the smile of a predator. The smile of a person who had traveled 36 hours to help strangers and was pleased that one of them had accepted her food. "Commander Rand," Torres said, "your ship took a hit from one of our probes, and I am genuinely sorry about that. We're still working on the targeting calibration for deep space objects." She paused. "But since we're here, since we've apparently been neighbors for 60,000 years and nobody told us, I have to ask." She looked at him, and her eyes carried something that Peleth would spend the rest of her career trying to name. "When do we start?" Rand looked at the empanada in his hand. He looked at the medical teams working on his crew. He looked at the engineers who had rebuilt his stabilizer with tools and materials from a completely different technological tradition in 6 hours. He looked at the woman standing in front of him, who had come because a probe had asked if anyone needed help, and who had brought food. "Captain Torres," he said, and his harmonics, even through the feed, even through the translation, even through the flat text on Peleth's screen, carried something that was not fear, something that might have been the opposite of fear. "I believe we already have." Peleth filed her final report on the Torvin incident 14 months later. Not because the incident was over, it would never be over, not really, not in the way that closed files implied, but because the Galactic Archives required a terminal entry, and she was the only archivist who had been there from the beginning. The galaxy had not ended. Oracle Sathena's prophecy had been half right. The old galaxy was dying. Trade routes were being redrawn for the third time. The Calethri had opened their first joint military exercise with human advisors, and Marshal Gorvin, who had wanted to burn a planet, had been photographed standing beside a human colonel who barely reached his second set of arms. He was not smiling, Calethri could not smile, but his plates were loose, relaxed, a posture Peleth had learned to read as something close to ease. The Netheri had established a cultural exchange station in orbit around Earth's moon. Commander Rand ran it. His crew, the 22 who survived, had requested permanent assignment. The stasis patient, the engineer with the hemorrhaging, had recovered fully. Netheri medical journals now contained 9 papers on portable stasis field applications adapted from human designs. 9. The same number as the cross-references that had started everything. Captain Torres had attended the Galactic Council's formal session 6 months after first contact. She brought empanadas, enough for every delegate. Peleth had watched from her observer's alcove, the same seat, the same low amber light, the same dry filtered air, as 14 founding species tried a human food for the first time. Gorvin ate 3. Sage Ilith San's harmonics shifted to a frequency that the Netheri cultural attaché later described as delight. Vas Tesserin, whose body had slowly brightened over the intervening months, held one in his crystalline hands and refracted the light through it as though studying it, and then consumed it in a way that Peleth still did not fully understand but that left crumbs on the ancient stone table. Professor Keleth published a revised paper on the Mordathi disappearance. The new conclusion: the Mordathi had not run from what the children of Torvin were. They had run from what they might become, and they had been right to be uncertain. But uncertainty, Keleth argued, was not the same as threat. The Mordathi had looked at humanity and seen a species without a ceiling, and they had assumed that meant destruction. They had not considered that it might mean something else. Peleth thought about that sometimes. A species without a ceiling. She thought about Drethvani, whose name she still carried in a file she had never been required to keep. She thought about the probe that had asked if anyone needed help. She thought about the 36 hours and the portable stasis field in a medic's bag, and the engineers who fixed what they had never seen because the thing in front of them was broken and they could not walk past a broken thing without reaching for it. She thought about the word Torvin. It meant the testing ground. That was the Mordathi translation, the ancient label for a world that produced beings the galaxy was not prepared for. For 60,000 years, the name had meant fear. It had meant quarantine and withdrawal and the particular kind of terror that comes from knowing something is out there and not knowing what it will do. Torres had called it cool. Peleth opened a new file. Not a report. Not an archival entry. A personal log, the first she had ever made in 46 years of service. She sat at her workstation in the xenobiology wing, surrounded by the soft hum of crystalline shelving and the faint smell of old polymer, and she wrote one sentence. The children of Torvin were not what we feared, they were what we had forgotten to hope for. She saved the file. She closed her terminal. The archive hummed around her, the same way it had hummed on the morning she opened Report 24, the same way it would hum tomorrow when the first human researchers arrived for their orientation tour. Torres had arranged it. She wanted her people to see the archive. She said they would love it. Peleth believed her. Through the crystalline walls of the xenobiology wing, the light of a distant yellow star, unremarkable, mid-sequence, one of billions, caught the edge of a data orb and scattered into colors that had no name in any language Peleth knew. The orb drifted in its magnetic cradle, warm and amber, carrying the first file humanity would ever add to the Galactic Archives. An entry written not in warning, not in fear, but in a language Peleth was only beginning to learn. It read, "Hello. We're glad you found us. 2 ships are still docked together out there, and somewhere between them, empanada crumbs are floating in zero gravity. What do you think the Mordathi would say if they could see that? Subscribe because tomorrow another species learns what Torvin really means. And that story might be even stranger than this one."